Alexander Sterling, billionaire owner of a luxury restaurant chain, decided to test his employees by disguising himself as a poor, homeless person. He dressed in ragged clothes, didn't shave for days, and entered his most exclusive Manhattan restaurant, pretending to look for work. What happened shocked him. Most of the staff treated him with contempt. Some threw him out without listening. Others openly insulted him. But when he was about to leave, disappointed in humanity, something unexpected happened. Emma Rodriguez, a young waitress on her first day, approached with a steaming plate of pasta she had paid for herself, saying, "I don't have much, but nobody should go hungry." She didn't know she was feeding the owner of everything around her. What Alexander did after discovering the true nature of Emma's heart changed both their lives forever and completely revolutionized how he ran his business. The kindness of a simple waitress was about to trigger a chain of events that would touch thousands of lives. Alexander Sterling watched from his office window on the 40th floor of Sterling Tower as New York traffic flowed like a river of lights in the evening. At 42, he owned a chain of 40 luxury restaurants across America, with assets exceeding $500 million. But behind his success lay a growing bitterness that tormented him increasingly often. In recent months, he had received an avalanche of complaints from customers about the treatment given to less fortunate people seeking help at his establishments. Stories of homeless individuals violently ejected from his terraces, families in need publicly humiliated in front of other diners, employees who seemed to have completely forgotten what human compassion meant. Reports arrived daily on his desk. In Los Angeles, staff at the Crown restaurant had called police to remove an elderly man asking for kitchen scraps. In Chicago, a mother with 2 small children was thrown out of the Golden Gate for being not elegant enough for the environment. In Miami, a young homeless person was literally dragged out of Ocean's Edge while begging just for a glass of water. Alexander had built his empire from nothing, personally knowing every nuance of poverty. Son of a factory worker and a diner waitress who worked at a suburban truck stop, he had started working in kitchens at 14, washing dishes until 2 in the morning to pay for culinary school. He had known real hunger, the kind that makes you pick up crumbs fallen on the floor, had slept in his car when he couldn't make rent, had worn the same shirt for weeks because he couldn't afford detergent. But perhaps, in his dizzying success over the past 20 years, he had lost control over who worked for him and the values he wanted to transmit. His restaurants had become golden fortresses where only the wealthy could feel safe, while those with less fortune were treated like a nuisance to be eliminated as quickly as possible. That evening, while reading yet another report from a customer disgusted by his staff's behavior, he made a decision that would change everything. Instead of sending anonymous inspectors or conducting formal checks that would only produce temporary performances, he decided to personally test his employees in the most direct and brutal way possible, by pretending to be a poor person seeking help. He spent the night meticulously preparing for the experiment. He went to a thrift store in Brooklyn and acquired a desperate person's wardrobe: frayed wool pants with holes at the knees, a stained and torn synthetic leather jacket, a gray t-shirt that had seen better days, worn sneakers with soles coming apart at every step, and laces knotted to hold them together. He hid his Rolex watches, gold rings, the family signet ring he had always worn. He deliberately dirtied his nails with garden soil, rubbed his hands with motor grease to give the impression of someone who works with their hands but can't afford a manicure. He didn't shave for 3 consecutive days, letting an unkempt and scraggly beard grow. He messed up his hair with dirty water and some oil to give that appearance of someone who hadn't seen shampoo in weeks. When he looked in the bathroom mirror on the ground floor, avoiding the one in his office to not be recognized by cleaning staff, even he didn't recognize himself. The man looking back from the other side of the glass truly seemed like one of those desperate people he often saw outside subway stations. with that sadness in his eyes that only extreme poverty can create. He chose the Palace as the theater for his experiment, his most exclusive restaurant in the heart of Manhattan, steps away from Central Park and the city's most expensive galleries. It was the symbol restaurant of his chain. Wealthy international clientele, prices starting at $80 for an appetizer, wine list containing bottles worth thousands of dollars, atmosphere so refined that even the rich felt intimidated. The staff at the Palace had been selected with meticulous care. Waiters with experience in Michelin-starred restaurants, sommeliers with international certifications, chefs who had worked in Europe's most prestigious kitchens. They were paid double the industry average and received substantial bonuses based on customer reviews. If his employees had retained a shred of humanity, despite the golden environment they worked in, it should have emerged even there. He presented himself at the restaurant entrance at 8 p.m. on a Friday, during peak hours when the establishment was packed and the atmosphere most frantic. The warm entrance lights illuminated elegant customers stepping out of luxury cars, men in tuxedos, and women in designer dresses preparing to dine by spending more than a factory worker earned in a month. The doorman, Steve Martinez, 50 years of experience at Manhattan's most exclusive venues, noticed him immediately. His gaze transformed from professional courtesy to visceral disgust in the span of a second. He physically blocked Alexander's path without even pretending politeness. His tone was brutal. "Hey, you! This isn't a place for people like you. Get lost before I call the cops." Alexander, maintaining the character he had built, lowered his gaze and asked in a trembling voice if he could speak with the manager about possible kitchen work. He explained he had experience, was willing to work for little, just needed an opportunity. Steve's response was even more chilling. "Are you crazy? Look how you're dressed. You stink from 10 feet away. They wouldn't hire you to clean toilets at a gas station." Alexander felt the first blow to his heart. Steve wasn't just any employee. He had hired him personally 3 years before, had attended his wedding, knew his story as a Mexican immigrant who had arrived in New York with a cardboard suitcase and built a new life through honest work. Taking advantage of a moment when Steve was distracted helping an elegant couple, Alexander managed to slip into the restaurant. The interior of the Palace was even more impressive. Frescoed ceilings, Venetian crystal tables, Irish linen tablecloths, silver cutlery reflecting light from Bohemian crystal chandeliers. It was the temple of culinary luxury, where every detail was designed to make customers feel part of an exclusive elite. The waiters noticed him immediately, like a dark shadow in a world of golden light. The reactions were even more inhuman than the doorman's. Marcus White, the head waiter Alexander had personally hired 2 years before, after stealing him from a competitor by paying a $50,000 signing bonus, approached with a menacing air and barely concealed contempt. Marcus didn't even bother to lower his voice. "Who let you in? This is a classy restaurant, not a homeless shelter. You're ruining the atmosphere for our real customers." Alexander, maintaining his act, explained in an imploring voice that he was just looking for work, that he knew how to cook and was willing to do anything. His past kitchen experience showed through his words, but Marcus didn't even hear it. The response was brutal. "The only job you could do here is disappear. Your presence ruins the appetite of real customers, the ones who pay our salaries." Other employees joined the chorus of contempt, creating a circle of hostility around Alexander. Luke Foster, the sommelier he had personally trained on the finest labels, whispered loud enough for half the restaurant to hear, "We should call pest control, not the police. Who knows what diseases he's carrying?" Julia Chen, a veteran waitress who had worked for him for 5 years and whom he had always considered part of the company family, was no better. "Just looking at him makes me sick. How did he get in here? Security doesn't work anymore?" Alexander felt his heart break into 1,000 pieces. These were people he paid generously, well above industry standards. to whom he had given growth opportunities, expensive training courses, productivity bonuses, whom he invited to company parties, whose families he knew, whose personal problems and dreams he was aware of, whom he considered not just employees, but collaborators with whom he had built his empire. Yet they were treating him worse than an animal, just because he appeared poor and desperate. There wasn't a shred of humanity in their eyes, no curiosity to understand his story, no impulse to help a human being in difficulty, only disgust, fear, and a visceral desire to make him disappear as quickly as possible. The restaurant's customers began to notice the scene. Some seemed uncomfortable with the situation, others visibly irritated by the disturbance to their elegant evening. Alexander heard whispered comments. Shameful they let him in. Ruins the atmosphere. This is what we pay these prices for? He was about to leave, deeply disappointed by his employees' human nature, and shocked by the discovery of having created a world of golden monsters, when something happened that changed everything and redefined his faith in humanity. A gentle voice behind him broke the wall of hostility surrounding him. "Excuse me, sir, have you eaten today?" Alexander turned and saw a girl he had never seen before in any of his restaurants. She appeared to be just over 20, brown hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, impeccable uniform, but worn naturally, not with the professional arrogance of the others. The name tag on her chest said, Emma Rodriguez, waitress, in clear, precise handwriting. She was evidently on her first day of work, because no one had yet corrupted her with the cynicism that pervaded the establishment like invisible poison. Before Alexander could respond, Emma walked toward the kitchen with determined steps, completely ignoring her colleagues' disapproving looks. Marcus called her with an authoritative tone.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
Telling her to leave that vagrant alone and return to work. But Emma didn't even turn around. She entered the kitchen and spoke briefly with one of the chefs, pulling her personal money from her wallet. She returned shortly after with a plate of spaghetti carbonara still steaming, prepared with care, and presented with the same elegance reserved for wealthy customers. She approached Alexander and placed the plate in front of him delicately, as if he were the restaurant's most important diner. "Please, eat. I paid for it." Yuri, the gesture was so unexpected, so pure and genuine, that Alexander felt his eyes moisten. In a world of cynicism, greed, and gratuitous cruelty, a simple waitress had chosen kindness without asking for anything in return, without knowing his story, without expecting recognition or reward. Emma sat across from him, completely ignoring her colleagues' incredulous and indignant stares. Her presence was an act of silent rebellion against the atmosphere of contempt that permeated the entire restaurant. She asked his name with sincere curiosity, and Alexander stammered the first one that came to mind. Emma introduced herself and asked if he had been out of work for long. Alexander invented a story of unemployment and misfortune. But what struck him deeply was how Emma listened to every word without judging him, without that condescending pity that humiliates more than indifference. There was genuine respect in her eyes, recognition of the human dignity everyone deserves regardless of circumstances. Emma confided that her father had lost his job the previous year, and that she had seen what it meant when dignity gets stripped away. No one should be treated as invisible just for having less luck in life. Marcus approached furiously, scolding her for wasting time with what he called an unwanted customer. Emma looked him straight in the eyes and asked if he had eaten that day already. The question caught Marcus off guard, and he couldn't respond. Emma continued, saying she had read the company manual that morning, and that Sterling restaurants had a very clear policy regarding treatment of the less fortunate. Every human being deserved respect and dignity. Alexander felt a shiver down his spine. Emma had done her homework, had studied the company values he himself had written years before. words that evidently no one else remembered or took seriously anymore. When some customers began to notice the scene with interest, and an elegant lady commented about seeing more class in that young waitress than in all the staff combined, Emma stood and addressed the entire restaurant with a dignity that left everyone speechless, apologizing if her gesture had disturbed anyone, but stating that if they could afford to dine in such a beautiful place, they could also afford to be human with those who had less fortune. The next day, Alexander convened an emergency meeting in the Sterling Tower conference room. All managers and supervisors from his 40 restaurants were present, but no one imagined what was about to happen. Alexander revealed the previous evening's experiment, showing security camera recordings that documented every moment of the humiliation he had suffered. The managers saw their employees throwing out an apparently poor man with contempt and cruelty, but also saw Emma offering a meal paid for with her own money to a stranger. The reaction was one of shock and general embarrassment. Robert Stone, general manager for 10 years, tried to minimize by talking about standards to maintain for exclusive clientele, but Alexander cut him off sharply. He announced the immediate implementation of Project Emma. Every restaurant would have a dedicated budget to offer free meals to people in difficulty. Staff would be trained on authentic hospitality values, and those who didn't adapt would be fired without appeal. Emma was promoted to head of ethical training for all restaurants in the chain. The girl, initially incredulous, accepted with the enthusiasm of someone who had finally found a way to make a difference in the world. The first change was the introduction of the $12 rule. Every restaurant had to set aside $12 for each cover served, creating a fund to help those in need. Not ostentatious charity, but silent dignity offered without judgment. Emma developed a revolutionary program called Hospitality of the Heart, which wasn't limited to service techniques but educated on empathy. Every employee had to spend a day at a homeless shelter to understand what it really meant to be invisible to the world's eyes. The results were immediate and surprising. Marcus resigned spontaneously after participating in the program, confessing he could no longer look at himself in the mirror. Other employees embraced the change enthusiastically, transforming the restaurants into places of true welcome. When the Project Emma story spread on social media, it went viral. The video of the young waitress offering a plate to a stranger touched millions of people, accompanied by Alexander's message about authentic hospitality values. 3 months after Project Emma began, results exceeded all expectations. Sterling restaurants not only maintained their luxury clientele, but attracted a new type of customer, people who chose to dine there precisely for the values they represented. Emma had become the public face of corporate transformation. Universities invited her to speak about how humanity could be a competitive advantage, and her story inspired thousands of people worldwide. For Alexander, the most important change was personal. Seeing Emma work with passion in transmitting authentic values had reminded him why he had started that business. Not for money, but for the joy of feeding people and creating moments of happiness. One evening, while working together to develop new training programs, Alexander confessed to Emma that he had thought he had lost faith in humanity, until she showed him that one person was enough to change everything. Emma responded that she hadn't created the change. Alexander had already planted the seeds by writing those company values. She had simply watered them with kindness. The project continued to expand. Other entrepreneurs copied the Sterling model, and soon the initiative spread throughout America. Emma received job offers from around the world, but chose to stay because she felt she had started something too important to abandon. During the company's annual dinner, Alexander made a speech that changed everything. Instead of talking about profits, he spoke about the courage of a young waitress who had taught him the true meaning of hospitality. Looking at Emma seated at the head table, he knelt before her with a simple but meaningful ring, asking her to marry him not as a billionaire or CEO, but as the man she had helped rediscover his humanity. The wedding was celebrated at the first restaurant in the chain, with a ceremony that reflected the values they had built together. The guests were not just family and friends, but every person they had helped through Project Emma. Emma developed second chance restaurants, establishments dedicated to hiring people with difficult pasts. Alexander supported every initiative, transforming the business model into social franchising where entrepreneurs committed to dedicating profits to social programs. When Emma became pregnant, they decided the baby would be born at a public clinic. Emma had insisted, if it was good enough for those who couldn't afford anything else, it was good enough for them. Their son, Michael, was born in the same period when Project Emma was officially adopted by New York City as a model for all commercial establishments in the city. 10 years after that evening that changed everything, Alexander watched Emma direct the annual assembly of the Sterling Rodriguez Foundation. Little Michael, now 9, was drawing projects for flying restaurants that could bring food to poor children worldwide. The foundation managed not only restaurant social programs, but had opened free cooking schools, training centers for ex-convicts, and international programs to export the model to developing countries. Emma had become a global reference figure for social entrepreneurship, but every Friday evening she returned to serve as a volunteer waitress at the restaurant where it all began, reminding herself where she came from. The impact was measurable. Over 50,000 free meals per month, 3,000 people trained and employed, 200 ex-convicts reintegrated into society. But true success was measured in individual stories of regained dignity. The 10th anniversary was celebrated with a free dinner for 10,000 people in Central Park. Emma, holding Michael, addressed the crowd. 10 years ago, I spent $12 on a plate of pasta. Today, that gesture has become a movement. But the real lesson is that each of you has the power to change the world. Alexander, watching his wife, thought back to that evening 10 years before. Emma had not only become his wife, but his moral compass, the person who had helped him transform financial success into authentic meaning. Michael interrupted his thoughts, asking if he too would open restaurants to help people when he grew up. Alexander replied that he could help in 1,000 different ways. The important thing was never to forget that every life had value. Today, the Emma model is studied in universities as an example of profitable ethics. The foundation operates in 25 countries and has helped over 1 million people. But for Alexander, Emma, and Michael, true success is still measured in simple gestures. A plate offered to the hungry, a smile to those who feel invisible. They learned that the world changes not through grand strategies, but through the daily decision to see humanity in every person. And that sometimes all it takes is $12 and the courage to love your neighbor. The story demonstrates that when love meets action, there are no limits to what humanity can achieve, and that every day, each of us has the opportunity to be someone else's Emma. It just takes the courage to choose kindness. Like if you believe every small act of kindness can change the world, comment sharing a moment when you helped a stranger or were helped by one. Share to inspire others to see humanity in every person. Subscribe for more stories that demonstrate the transformative power of compassion. Sometimes a plate of pasta is worth more than any financial investment. Sometimes a stranger's kindness can save not just a life, but a soul. And sometimes all it takes to change the world is $12 and the courage to love.